Many thanks. I'm afraid you are stuck with the Cyprus problem in my case. I'll stick to the Cyprus conflict, but I will keep the comparative perspective because I consider it very important to look at the microgeography of conflict, to look at the frozen conflict, as Harry said, not really just a frozen conflict. There is a lot of dynamism, there is a lot of change within this so-called frozen conflict. There are more than two actors. We usually speak of the two sides in Cyprus, the motherlands, the UN, whatever. There are local actors as well. If we look comparatively at the microgeography of the Cyprus conflict. This is what I'm going to do. This is based on research. Especially this area is an area I have been researching over the last 5-6 years. I think it's a very interesting area. I have two questions in relation to, before I talk about, I won't be able to talk about all the three sites that I point out here, which is Pila, the Acna forest and Strovilla. We probably have time only for two. I have two questions. The first question is how communities, local communities, negotiate and adapt their claims and aspirations when protracted conflicts remain unresolved, and what forms of self-determination, what forms of vernacular or idiomatic self-determination arise in the interstices of sovereignty and territorial governance? I think these are very important questions which help us to understand the complexity of a frozen conflict. I will follow conceptual developments regarding self-determination. I will very epigrammatically talk about this, utilizing some critical approaches, relational and intersectional. And the empirical manifestation concerns this negotiation, this adaptation within and across the states of exception that Cypriots live and operate and have found interesting ways to manage conflict when we look at the microgeographies and not just the whole of Cyprus. Very briefly to talk about self-determination, because this is my conceptual framing. Self-determination is a foundational principle of international relations. It's there in the UN Charter as a principle. It becomes a right in the international covenants. Interestingly, this Article 1 of both the civil and political rights covenant and the covenant of social, economic, and cultural rights. This in itself is idealistic, is very important in terms of the crucial phase, the first phase of decolonization, but as you know, it has created a lot of problems. All peoples have the right of self-determination. Who is a people? How many people are? How many peoples are here? We have Greek Cypriot self-determination in relation to the Greek nation, Turkish Cypriot separately from Turkey or with Turkey. So the whole idea of the peoples creates a geopolitical mess, not only in Cyprus, all over the world in terms of claims. And this idea of freely determining the political status, freely determine, how do you freely determine? Is it through independence? Is it through referenda? Is it through separate referenda, and so on? That's why I think conceptually it helps to think, especially in relation to Cyprus, of interstitial self-determination, how the aspiration of self-determination is adapted, has to be adapted and exercised in protracted conflict zones. And this is the definition that I give. Sustained political activity, interstitial self-determination is sustained political activity in the spaces between rival systems of governance through which groups of people negotiate and adapt their political status and variably pursue forms of economic, social, and cultural autonomy. In other words, interstitial self-determination explores how political agency is exercised in liminal or in-between spaces where claims to sovereignty, as in the map that you see here, claims to sovereignty are contested or overlapping, or where the exercise of governmental control is constrained and or challenged. You probably, most of you, if not all, know this area. The Cypriots definitely do. Southeast Cyprus, you have four contesting claims to sovereignty. You have the Republic of Cyprus, the areas that it controls, the non-recognized Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, in between the buffer zone. Of course, you have the British bases as well, which sovereign British bases exercise jurisdiction. There is no buffer zone, interestingly, between the north and the bases, which creates interesting conditions vis-a-vis the exercise of self-determination. What does interstitial self-determination entail? Before I move to the cases, contested or rival authority, which creates crevices and opportunities to practice self-determination in ways that do not align neatly with established state-centric models. It has contested or plural status beyond national or ethnic identification. I think the local communities could exercise multiple affiliations, especially in Pila, also in Achna, also in Strovilla, which allows groups of people to support modes of living and to shape destinies. There are very interesting modi vivendi that have been negotiated in these sites. There is adaptive governance, which allows local actors to adapt flexibly to shifting legal, social, and political contexts, meaning that governance may emerge through hybrid or informal institutions rather than official state apparatuses. And finally, there is negotiated autonomy instead of alignment with a sovereign entity that formally delivers autonomy. It involves ongoing negotiation of the local actors of their autonomy with multiple centers of power, not with one center of power. And that I find very interesting, and that's why I use the term interstitiality. Overall, I think this exhibits very much what a number of authors, but also Gedasho has described in terms of self-determination, the idea of world-making, that self-determination was not only about decolonization, it was about the creation of alternative worlds. Very important to remember that the decolonial movement, Gandhi and Nkrumah, Nyerere, didn't just want to get rid of the colonial powers, but to create alternative worlds. You see it here in terms of the freedom to create small alternative worlds within which forms of autonomy may be practiced. Although I must also register, and I think this is very important, a caveat concerning idealization or romanticization. There is an emancipatory potential, but I'm not saying that there are no challenges and limitations that can turn utopic space into dystopic spaces. And Pila is one primary example of a utopia that can also be a dystopia for those who live in that area, like James. Let us first think about Pila. I imagine most of you Cypriots have been to the place. You know what I'm talking about. Pila reflects very much ethnic and political cooperation in a space where both the Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot communities must navigate daily life in a shared, contested environment. Under UN control, it's an example of cohabitation. It's also sometimes presented very idealistically, where Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots live together in peace. But there is negotiation. There is assertion of autonomy, primarily through informal economies, and that links it to the idea of self-determination. Self-determination, the second aspect of self-determination is the freedom to pursue economic development, social and economic development. It's not just to determine political status. That's why I feel the concept of self-determination is very useful to illustrate and examine what is taking place in these microgeographies. We know it's a highly profile case, sustained over more than 50 years, although it is definitely not trouble-free. We have the Greek Cypriot municipality, we have the Turkish Cypriot municipality, we have a contested plural status. In what ways? In ways Turkish Cypriots are also Republic of Cyprus citizens and also TRNC citizens. There is a very interesting difference. They also live in areas controlled by the Republic of Cyprus, even though they live in the buffer zone, and that gives them ability to negotiate EU funding in relation to fields, etc. So there is a very interesting difference in being inside Pillar. Let's talk, I can talk about streets, names, etc. Let's leave that because I don't have time. How about this, green line regulation? There is an exception to the green line regulation relating to Pillar. This is Article 4, paragraph 10 of the green line regulation. The authorities of the Eastern Sovereign Base Area may maintain the traditional supply of the Turkish Cypriot population of the village of Pillar with goods coming from the areas which are not under the effective control. What does that mean in practice? What does that mean in practice? The traditional supply for personal needs, for commercial needs. We know, because we know about Pillar, we know what happens in practice. In practice, there are informal economies that are created, and there is collaboration between Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots over these informal economies, which can be idealized and is very interesting in terms of bi-communal activity. It's also very dark when it comes to the casinos, when it comes to other problems that are created in Pillar. I don't have time to go into more examples. I can do that during the Q&A. But I want to move to the second case that I consider very interesting. What's going on? Cannot see. The second case is Akhna, and it helps if we get the photos, because how many of you have been to the Akhna forest? Just to get an idea. Akhna forest, 4 or 5. Okay. It's a very interesting space, which is within the sovereign base areas. The people who live there, the overwhelming majority of the people who live there, are displaced Greek Cypriots from the village of Akhna, which is occupied. It's actually an army camp. They just moved about 500, excellent, thank you, about 500 meters to a kilometer into the forest. And what do they have? They have the protection of the British sovereignty, which is, of course, a continuation of the colonial sovereignty. It's a very interesting case of it's a British overseas territory officially. It combines, what I find interesting is that it combines pragmatic pursuits of social and economic development, what you can do under the protection of the British authorities. We need to remember that during the Treaty of Establishment, which is also the Treaty of Establishment of the British sovereign bases, the Treaty of Establishment of the Republic of Cyprus, this is the first partition. We don't remember this as a partition. It's the first legal partition of Cyprus, the 1960 partition. What is very interesting is that during that period, the British authorities didn't want residents within the bases. It was very important they allowed it. You had to get a special permit in order to reside within the bases. They allowed it for humanitarian reasons, but overall, the villages had been outside the British base area. However, after 1974, given that all these displaced refugees, displaced people from Akhna just moved to the forest, they resided there. You can see actually the tents as a church. It's a very tragic village. It's a very interesting village to visit. It's a very nationalist village as well to visit. It's probably the most nationalist village in the south. That map leaves no room for imagination. You know, Cyprus is in the Aegean. If you go to Akhna, you go back to the 1950s in very interesting ways. It's an anti-colonial presentation. It's very theatrical. But what I find interesting is that there is also cohabitation with the British authorities. There is a lot of respect given the protection that Britain has provided to the Greek Cypriot refugees that the Republic of Cyprus was not able to provide. So it has provided that security. However, they very much stage their anti-colonial, all these Areoka heroes just outside in the main street, which is actually also, I have it here, it's also the street names. All the street names are Areoka heroes. The main street is Rivari Enis. This is within the SPAs. Makarios is a small street. Rivas is the main avenue. So very interesting in terms of that ability to symbolically at least register that resistance. Let me conclude because I think I'm over time. I have 1 minute. Thank you very much. Maybe I'll show you a few. I have more pictures, but I think this should do. Pila, that we saw before, is a model case of interstitial self-determination. The community, the local community, actively negotiates life between multiple governance systems with the mediation of the UN, creatively maintaining political agency and socio-economic autonomy in the way I described before. Akhna Forest exercises interstitial self-determination primarily at the cultural symbolic level. While it is situated between governance systems, the negotiation of political status is relatively static and more expressive than functional. Still, it's symbolic reclamation of space within a sovereign area, within a foreign, in inverted commas, sovereign area, is very significant. Overall, I suggest that these cases and other sites, I didn't have time to talk about Slovenia, I can do that during the Q&A, and other sites beyond those three, in Cyprus, from the supposedly frozen conflict landscape, are actually very dynamic, very active, very fluid, and underscore the importance of exploring both intersectional and relational approaches to assessing self-determination and the prospects of conflict management and everyday diplomacy in Cyprus. Thank you.